Anyway, it's 1 o'clock, guys. So what we're doing is we're setting up this weekly call to establish a forum to talk about a practitioner's perspective of making things happen. And this is really very much more around our views of the emerging challenges and solutions, and provide an opportunity for the delegates to contribute towards the discussion. And it's all about taking action and reporting back. So as this group grows and becomes more successful, what we're going to do is to play back some of that. I guess there's three things. One is it's the business and people warning signs, recognising those, which David will cover off some of those things, and I will cover off those. It's the urgency and the skills to operate multilaterally as well, which goes well beyond the normal remit of project management. And the other thing is what's preventing our teams from taking action. So as a lot of this content is critical, happy to overrun as required to spend the time to get this right. So there are three things we're going to cover. I'm going to cover the experience of 200 company turnarounds. Before that, David's going to talk about the fear and some of the people-related issues. And Mike's going to talk about the how. In other words, how do we make this thing happen? And after each session, we're going to have a discussion between ourselves, and the participants or attendees can join that and raise any questions as they like. We'll try and cover those off. I won't publish this discussion online, so I encourage people to stay on and contribute. But if any questions crop up, then I'm happy to cover those off one-to-one. So I think the other thing is this is really very much focused on not so much theory and very much practice. So I think, there's a lot of people commentating on these types of situations from an academic perspective, a consulting perspective. What we're talking about is very much a hands-on perspective. And that's really what our focus is on this call. So without further ado, David, we'd like to just introduce yourself and just kick off with your talk.
Sure. I'm David McLean. I'm the Managing Director of DRM Group. My very brief history is I'm a senior psychotherapist. I have been for the last 8 to 10 years now, and prior to that, I was a Royal Marines commando. So I use very much the science of what I know, psychology, neuroscience, etc., the science of what I know, linked into, I suppose, the very best that the elite Marines gives us, and the ability to be able to put that into business and put that into people and to help people create lasting positive change and to become the very best members of the team that they are, or the very best individuals. Mm-hmm. So, yes, what I was going to say, actually, what I quite like is one of the points that you just brought up there, Tom, in terms of what's stopping our teams from being successful.
Yeah.
I always like to kind of bring it back to the individual. The work that I do, and sort of similar to the rest of us, or similar to Tom, is very much solution focused. It's very much about where are we going, what laced with evolutionary psychology. Where are we going? Why are we doing what we're doing? What is the foundations of behaviour? Because we're all exactly the same. Of course, we're all beautifully unique as individuals, but we're all exactly the same. And what is it that the individual needs to do to perform better, to get greater results? But first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about fear. And how fear can be debilitating for all of us. It's a normal, obviously, aspect of human behaviour in terms of our success, and it can absolutely debilitate us. There's no problem about that. However, in the times that we're living in at the moment, fear has been raised considerably. And in general, of course, this can be the fear of the unknown, the fear of what's going to happen. Have I still got a job? Have I still got a business now? While these are obviously all valid points, when does having the necessary knowledge and the awareness of the up-to-date information, when does this become too much? Now, we're watching the news, we need to know, we need to understand social distancing, we need to understand that we shouldn't be going outside as much, things like that, of course, and we need to understand how the government perhaps is going to aid us financially in our businesses. But when does it get too much? When does it get to the point when it becomes detrimental to ourselves as a person? We know scientifically, it's proven that fear or stress, it lowers our immune system. fear, stress, worry excessively. And it means that the amygdala is that little area in the lower regions of the brain, it will fire off and it will put the individual into that fight, flight or freeze mode. And the evolutionary and survival traits will kick back in.
Yeah.
And when you're in that place where you're much less likely to make rational decisions, you're much less likely to be performing in the right way, if you like. You're more likely to feel low, you're more less active, a feeling of hopelessness. And of course, this just isn't in the individual. Remember, if you are running a business with staff members, it will be everybody within there. So we need to start to think about that and think about what can we do to make changes. So if you're lacking in motivation in your life and that you're in that survival mode at the moment, then it's the external environmental factors, potentially the social factors, and that internal self-induced factors that are going to keep you from moving forward and pushing you down further.
Yeah.
So I feel that, of course, where we must take heed of the government's advice, we must do the right thing. We must also recognise what kind of effect is this having on you. What kind of effect is this fear-based scenario having on you personally, and of course, your ability to perform and your business's ability to perform. And it's not just all about, it's that kind of, let's be positive. Positive memes on social media is not going to make that much of a difference. It's not going to cut it. I get that. But it's about the importance, as I mentioned there, recognising the foundations of human behaviour. Yeah. Really recognising who we are. Recognising that the abilities that you do have. It's a kind of an obvious thing, and most successful people do it either automatically or they train themselves more to do that. But naturally, the creatures that we are, the habitual creatures, that we do focus on problems. We're problem-focused animals because we need to solve problems within business, etc., to move forward. But inside our own brain, it's also a very much different. We must focus on solutions. It sounds like a bit of a strap line, but you must focus on what you do want. Start to tell that different story. Make sure that you're looking at points, whatever it is, in a kind of more positive light. So what I want to kind of bring to you, and maybe you've heard this before, but understanding that foundationally, human nature, human behavior is all exactly the same in terms of the principles to make change. So we tend to think go from this top-down approach, perhaps people that know psychology, the psychoanalytical and psychodynamic views, that is kind of pushing down on people and people putting everybody in separate boxes and seeing everybody who's dealing with all these different things. Now, to an extent, we have to do that, but what we have to do, if we look at the foundations of human behavior, if we look at the key principles that change everyone, and I'll be talking a little bit about that as we go on. But if we recognise all these key principles, then that is what allows us to move forward. We work from the foundations of who we are. You know that kind of old story, if you stand on the very left-hand side of the east coast of America and you set a compass bearing to go directly and walk or drive across to the west coast, you'll get there easy enough. But of course, if you change that compass by 1 degree on the east coast of America and you drive, you're going to end up in a completely different place. And you've obviously heard of that metaphor, that analogy before. Yeah. It's exactly the same inside. So that change, that small changes, which is why one of the key principles of change is marginal gains in terms of small changes. That small internal change will make a tremendous difference in things on. So these sort of things, when we kind of underestimate, is it really worth a run? I know it's good for me, but I'm too busy. Or, positive thinking, I've got a lot on my mind, I've not got time for this, whatever it may well be. It's actually really, really important that you take that on board and that you recognise those small changes are vitally important. So how I like to put it, kind of frame it, if you like, is that we are our thoughts. That's really all we are. I'm not going to get too philosophical about it, but that's what we are. So our thoughts create our feelings. Our feelings then create the actions, the things that we do. Yeah. And then our actions then produce our results. So it's vitally, vitally important that we change our thought patterns. So what, again, is the story that you're telling yourself? What is the story that you're telling your staff members? You know, are you telling them that it's going to be a very, very, very difficult period and we're going to lose people? May be true, but of course that's a negative statement. It's going to push people down into the lower regions of the brain, and they say the amygdala is going to fire off and they're going to stop performing correctly. So what are the thoughts that you're saying? What is the story that you're telling yourself? Where is your belief levels? How often are you doing it? How often are you repeating yourself? How often are you telling yourself that different story and making sure that you're going in that right direction? That really is, as I've talked about from the foundational point of view. And it's evolutionary psychology to an extent. It's recognizing that that's who we are, that's where we have always been, and that is what will ultimately change the results that we want. And of course, the results is a successful business. The Royal Marines talk about adapting and overcoming. Adapt and overcome is a key aspect. Of course, you don't need to be in the Marines to recognise it and know that, but it's a really, really important point as well. And it's actually one of the kind of the points, the tips I was going to bring on there. Understanding who you are, understanding the importance of that, understanding the times that you've come through difficulties, that you've recognised that in yourself already. So I was talking. I don't do individual therapy anymore, but I was talking with people earlier on, and they were saying that it will kind of we get the wheat from the chaff, if you like. The strong people who are willing to adapt, willing to do what's necessary, they will overcome. And of course, that's one of the reasons why we're all on here, to learn more.
Yeah.
So I just want to leave you with 6 kind of top tips, however you want to put it, just 6 points really. And remember the importance of them if we can relate back to what I'm talking about there in terms of the thoughts and the marginal gains of the small changes and how that control will build and create momentum in terms of the changes, the positive changes you're making. Quite simply, keeping active. Again, none of these you won't, it's not rocket science. All of these you'll have heard before. But of course, they're very important. Keeping active, the walking, running, fresh air. What is actually that doing? It's producing serotonin, endorphins, dopamine, etc. within our body, which of course pushes us into the higher regions of the brain, which means that we're going to be more rational. You're going to make the right decisions. You're going to be naturally more motivated. You're going to have that get up and go and that skip in your steps. So it's vitally important. The positive thinking and positive interaction. Again, those 2 areas, again, those 3 of them, if you like, the 3 Ps, I call it. Positive thinking, physical activity, and positive interaction. Those 3 areas are key in terms of serotonin production, in terms of the motivation and momentum. So thinking positively, where are you going? What story are you telling yourself? And what direction are you moving you and your team, your business in?
Yeah.
Positive interaction. An obvious one, of course. I'm self-isolating at the moment, so I understand that more than ever, but we've got Zoom now, thankfully, Skype and whatever else. Even at social distancing, I've seen some people visiting their relatives and shouting up and down to the window from outside the road, so it's better than nothing. But again, we can sometimes pay lip service to these sort of things, but they're vitally, vitally important. Generally not in a one-er, not the first time, but it's building that momentum. And it's so important in all aspects of life, as you know, as well as in business. Healthy diet, again, we know about that one. Meditation, I certainly swear by that. I was a very Royal Marine scientific person, and I never moved down that kind of meditation space. Some of you might be there, some of you might not, but I mean, it's been around for 5,000 years, so they're probably onto something. And personally, I feel like a huge difference in terms of overall well-being with that. And the last one, which I've touched on there, is just remembering who you are. Remembering which links into the belief. Belief is everything, of course, and it's limiting beliefs that stop us and make our businesses fail, or life fail, whatever it may well be. So remembering who you are, remembering that you're resilient, remembering that you can cope, remembering that you've dealt with situations that are similar perhaps, or sometimes even worse. There's plenty of people that have had worse, not overall, but worse things to deal with, and that you're still here. So bolstering up and shoring up the foundations of who you are.
Yeah. Right.
So that's me. Thank you very much. And over to you.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Mike? What are your thoughts?
I think it's wonderful to get that input, because too often when you're confronted with a serious business situation, you go in there and you're ready to do all sorts of things. But unless you repair these things that David, or address these things that David is highlighting here, you might have some short-term success, but the thing won't hold up for any period of time.
Yeah.
What David talks about gives the organization the stamina.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, David, for me, give me in terms of what really resonates with me is people losing themselves in this current climate. I think it's a great danger, and I think what worries me is that they become easy to knock over as in themselves. What do you think the triggers are? I mean, how do people recognise that, in themselves, and what should they do about it if they're getting towards that stage?
Yeah, so kind of key principles of stress, if you like, or poor mental health, mental well-being. I mean, there's many different things, and we know, of course, that when we're not quite feeling ourselves, it can be just quite simply we're not feeling ourselves, we're feeling off.
Yeah.
What I want to remind everybody as well is that anxiety, depression, anger, whatever it is they're all evolutionary traits. That's all they are. Now, let's be serious. It makes people jump off bridges and etc. Let's be serious about this. However, it's an evolutionary trait. So it's a very normal, natural thing. So the first thing that happens when you are feeling any of the symptoms, which we'll talk about, if you're feeling anything that you're feeling a little bit off, try and kind of ease yourself to an extent and say, right, this is not what I want by any stretch of the imagination, but it's normal, it's natural, and actually a very good working brain. But so the kind of key areas are anger, anxiety and depression, but of course not everybody has to be fully fledged depressed, pulling the duvet over their head for 6 months, or having panic attacks, or jumping out your car trying to punch somebody or whatever it is because of road rage. That's kind of the end result. So on the kind of way up to that, if you like, in terms of depression, if you're feeling a little bit low, if you're lacking in motivation, if you're obviously procrastinating, if you're not smiling as much as you are, if you don't have as much happiness, if you're sleeping more, if you're just feeling that little bit low and don't have that kind of fun and feeling of fun in your life, then you're on the way towards that depression. Of course, we can change that. Anxiety as well, it doesn't need to be fully fledged panic attacks, but it can be that shortness and tightness of chest, perhaps just feeling a little bit spaced out, a little bit sharp with people, a little bit off, a little bit panicky, and for no real reason. And of course, if you watch the COVID-19 daily bits and pieces, I say it's important, as I go back to the fear point, it's important to recognise and understand what's going on. But if you watch that day after day, then you will suffer from anxiety. And anger, as I say, you don't need fully fledged road rage. It can be just that sharpness, particularly if you're living with people and living with our loved ones. We don't usually spend this much time with them. So if you're sharp and you're a bit sharp-natured, you're short-fused, you say things, and then afterwards you think, oh, they really didn't deserve that. All that type of thing, again, is leading towards that, which is fine because you recognise and see it. What do you do about that? The principle is all exactly the same. Get out for a run if you can. Get out for fresh air. Make sure that you do interact with people positively if possible, and of course whoever that is. Phone your friends, phone your mother, whatever. Think positively and thinking positively, and positive interaction. The three of them, and physical activity, and the three areas. That is what creates the serotonin. Why does that not work straight away? Because we're lazy as human beings in general. We want a quick fix, which is why we eat cream buns, which is why we go for the glass of red wine, which is why we gamble sometimes, why people will take drugs, all these different things, of course, at the extreme level, but why the average in society will have the pizza, will have the Jaffa cakes and all the rest of it, because they want that quick fix. They want to feel better. They do that, they get the dopamine rush, they feel better, and they drop back down again. The serotonin production from doing the bits and pieces that we need to do, the small changes, gathers the momentum. The run for a week or so will gather the momentum. Being positive, making sure you understand what you're thinking about will gather momentum. Making sure you interact with people positively every day if possible, or certainly over Zoom, and that's what I'm doing. Will gather the momentum. And that's what will grow the serotonin levels in general and give you that feeling of well-being, and make sure that you're able to do what you need to do. As Mike said, to give you that ability to the strength in numbers, if you like, within yourself, and that depth of strength that can never be underestimated.
I'd probably like to add humour to that list as well. I think humour is pretty useful.
Humour, absolutely.
I don't know where that fits in the list. Maybe it's positive interaction. I don't know, but I think
Well, one of the key aspects is cheerfulness under adversity of the Royal Marines. That's one of the ethos and the values is of cheerfulness under adversity. So it's it's as well as adapting and overcoming. Obviously, it's very, very important.
Yeah. Although my humour can be a little bit challenging sometimes. Also,
to all of it.
Anyway, that's great. Anyway, so maybe let's pick up any other points as we're walking through. So thanks for that, David. It's very clear. What I'll run through is some practical steps based on our experience of 200 company turnarounds. Why do we need to bomb-proof our business over the next 3 weeks to survive and thrive? It's pretty exhaustive, and I make no excuses for that. But as Mike and I well know, you need to hit these things on all fronts, and very happy to discuss any of these things afterwards. The great paradox with me, I think, is that I come across, as Richard said earlier, that I smash down doors, but then I sort of stop and say, actually, how are you? And I'm actually interested in the answer. So whilst I'm comfortable in difficult situations, I think I'm going to intentionally bombard you with quite a lot of information, but my interest is just to provoke some fresh thought. The first thing I think is the government cash. Now, government cash, all that gives us is more time. The question is, what will we do with it? Turnaround strategy is always about planning for the worst case and best practice, because from the worst case, things can only be upwards. But I think in this current situation, it's not a nice to have, it's actually a survival tool. And actually, once we're out of this particular situation, whatever form it takes, I'm not suggesting that's the same, then customers will be in a position, or we should be in a position, when they're desperate to buy, to give them what they want. So I think as well in the background, I've been arguing for a long time that businesses should be able to cope with about 60% less revenue, which sounds a bit bold, but I've seen a lot of things go wrong. And so I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but I'm not massively surprised. I think the first thing is stop wondering what to do. And what are the decisions that you have to do to secure and make your business safe? The challenge with this is, will you, can you, and dare you make these actions happen? And do you want to risk not making these things happen? And what's your plan to be ready to launch in maybe 14 to 21 days? I think it's a bit like Mike Tyson, as Richard commented the other day, that you've got a plan until you get hit on the jaw. Now, COVID-19 is a bit of an unpleasant sort of hit on the jaw, but actually it's not unusual to have that type of challenge in an organisation, albeit a bit more self-contained. The fact is as well that the global economy is 24% down, and most businesses have only got 27% of cash, according to JP Morgan. So it's vital to look at the offer and how well does that actually hit the mark. So if you take a supermarket, for example, what's the impact on supermarkets? Typically they've supplied only 60% of food in the UK. Now, having shut all the other routes to market, they're now supplying 100%. So that's great for your supermarket. But the distributors up to the restaurants are really taking a hit. So what is the challenge for them? What are they going to do with their products? The short term, what are they going to do to sell their product in supermarkets, move it through? And also there's a large fear-based aspect in this as well, whereby customers are hoarding stuff. And on the 21st of March, after Boris's announcement, there was a 40% increase in sales, which is pretty dramatic. And 67% was alcohol, which, as David knows, is a serotonin inducer. It's a great drug, but there are problems with it. There are 84% of increase in frozen foods. So you've got this immediate reaction. And this raises the question as to whether or not businesses will start hoarding cash in the same way and stop paying each other, right? Which could be a nasty dynamic that becomes a norm as we move forwards. The other dynamic, I think, as well, is the government reliance on funding and the assumption that the danger of an assumption that the government will pick up the tab if things go wrong, which is a very peculiar dynamic I think we've just introduced. It's like, Jeremy Corbyn's best dream coming from Boris Johnson, which is an odd paradox. Also, in terms of garden centres are, got a lot of fresh produce, and their balance sheet is dependent upon their value of their stock, and that could deteriorate and be worth nothing. So even if you stand still, your product could become worth nothing. Engineering companies as well, they never did sell widgets, and they're interesting enough, they always survive crises because they do something useful, they produce something useful that people want. The challenge with these businesses, what's their core business, and are they giving us away? You know, any business has always have something that they're really good at, which is the basis of defendable profits. And even more so, even if you're mothballing a business like a restaurant, cash flow becomes even more important because you've got no sales, so you really need to manage and triage your cash very, very carefully. So that's no easy ride. So, and the other interesting dynamic as well, I think that in terms of mantras, is the heroes in this situation actually the lowest paid people. So there's lots of challenges here in terms of what's evolving and the new sort of norm that's coming out of this. Techco's also being challenged, where historically I've challenged this quite hard. If you ever listened to any of my videos around the loss-making focus on growth, which has never been sustainable, and the investors now are finally pulling the funding, which, to be honest, I'm quite pleased about. I think there's a degree of sanity there. The people side of more face-to-face connections, I think, is becoming more important. And there's a humility, which is a good place to start in terms of beginning to take some of these actions. I think as well, there's been a background of intrusive surveillance, which has undermined the people side of businesses. But actually, in all of this, what's interesting is that all of these issues have been around all the time. So these are nothing new. And the question is, where have they come from? How have they got hidden? If you just, one question to challenge that is actually, if you ask yourself, what were the challenges your organization faced in the last five years, and what the actions you took, you'll soon find out where you've arrived, where you've got to, and what was the thinking, what were the mantras that enabled you to get to where you've got to. And also, we run 2 different case studies, which are, frankly, case studies that people can't fix, require a different capability beyond the normal MBA capability. And what you find in those situations is that everybody gives a different answer, right? And that's interesting because not everybody can be right. But of course, if you think about an organization, everybody's responding to things in a different way. That creates a lot of activity, but not necessarily productivity. So it's no wonder that no wonder people are busy, and no wonder strategies are misaligned. Certainty too, I think I'd add to your list, maybe, David, in terms of people's ability to make decisions. And in this, I think we've got a degree of certainty in the next 3 weeks, which is exiting this period of quarantine, which we need to plan for. And actually, what's the world going to look like at that point in time? And I think as well, there's a dynamic around personal uncertainty, which is very unsettling, which is around jobs, health, and people's values, which have been severely challenged, along with the sort of materialist kick you get out of buying stuff you don't need, which is, I think, been a challenge for quite a long time for society. So in all of this, the challenge is, specifically, are we saying when we get through this, so what's the assumption that's driving? Are we creating potentially a situation of stasis? And I was just listening to an exec in a large telco today, commenting that the business actually is doing really well. It's really, really producing a lot of cash. That said, they've got issues with underlying fraud, which can be covered up in exactly the same way as I've just described with some of these mantras. And there's some issues around fundamentals around 5G security, where they're making standards like security is up to governments. We can't influence that. We don't anticipate security to be a problem. We've designed it in from the beginning. Now, that sounds quite benign, but if you're not careful, that legitimizes 2 things. One is improving security. You can create a norm, say, look, that's okay. When in fact, there are far more 5G base stations than there ever have been. But it also legitimizes doing business with countries like China, which maybe should be challenged ethically from time to time. So I think around what creates these types of problems, it's the sort of roadblock around thinking that we can't increase pricing, we'll lose customers, or online retail is cheaper when in fact it's more expensive than mixed bricks and mortar. And I think the the point as well, David, that you made around people being stressed or being stuck in the amygdala mode is very important, well made, that people are fundamentally, it's harder work to think at the moment. So the danger is, I think, that we're very much stuck in the sort of situation we're in. So it's a good time to check our assumptions. It's a good time to check the thinking and check these statements and become aware of them. And these are very much at the core of the business and people warning signs that I was talking about before, being aware of these things, because these are the things that I think we need to fix. And being aware of, we just need to get through the next 6 months type statements in terms of somehow things will get back to normal. So within this, we've got a solvency window, as I described, whereby we really need to take advantage of it to hit this 3-week outcome and this period of quarantine. So we need to face the facts. So the first thing is really around cash flow. So how much cash have people got, and actually managing through that situation on sometimes on a day-by-day basis, at month end or whatever the period is, to make sure there's enough cash and triaging that, because that actually keeps your options open. A business without cash becomes very, very difficult to run. So cash provides the time, it provides the options. The financial model as well, I mentioned before, it's vital in a manufacturing business that these types of businesses actually understand their core business, where they're making money, not give that away, and challenge that and identify where in the business they're losing money, because all businesses lose money in certain areas and they make money in other areas, and that's critical. And some of that you need to stop. You might decide to stop. The challenge with this is also not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So quite a few people at the moment are saying, well, we'll give away our services free of charge. One thing with that is it creates a low expectation in terms of the value of the service, but it also is a great danger with throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because it's a difficult precedent again to undo. So it's a question of redefining the model, the commercial model, and also to check all business that comes into the organisation against that commercial model, so you've got some control. You've got a trigger to say, look, does this fit with this commercial model, yes or no? And frankly, to change all of your margins to actually make it attractive and have take the tough call. So actually, we're going to start now making money. We're going to start actually trying to get this business to work, and we need to be bold. And that's largely what I spend a lot of my time doing. I'm sure you do, Mike, in terms of holding leaders' hands and saying, look, just because it's difficult, it isn't, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It actually is just difficult, and we need to just step over the edge and take some difficult decisions. And I think there are some pitfalls as well. So asset-based finance looks really attractive as a large lump of cash, but actually in a falling revenue situation, it's an absolute trap, because your cash availability deteriorates quite rapidly. So there's some real practical things. And I think the other thing is, in a team, when we're remote working, it's vitally important that we use our team, rather like we're 3 of us here together, to check our decision making, because we don't get things right, and the expectation is just because you're the boss, all the answers to the questions is just ridiculous. So it's a good time to find that humility and recognise the strengths of your people, so you appreciate them and play to those strengths and see it through. So in a nutshell, rethinking is hard at the best of times. Right now, I think it's got a whole lot harder. The challenge is, what can we do to actually break this cycle? And there's some real hard issues to address around the supply chain, some real hard issues to address around the people side of businesses, and there's some real tough decisions to be made. So I think the challenge of this is to identify what is the current thinking now, and where does that misalign your strategy? My view as an experience is very much that you must concurrently repair your team relationship that you have, because there's always things you can and can't say to each other. You need to identify the flaws, and you need to be able to stay on target, and create a way of working that actually steers you away from some of these pitfalls, holds each team member to account, and enables people to take immediate action. Because it's only by taking immediate action that actually you learn anything. Because that's actually, in terms of resilience, certainly from my experience, in terms of building resilience, and what you were saying, David, about the Royal Marines' agility and effectiveness link, that agility is about taking new actions and actually realising that's okay. because flexible thinking without action is frankly utterly worthless. And it becomes a bit like navel gazing, I think. And it's almost worse, actually, because, it lacks humility. It's almost like you create your own legendary capability in your own lunchtime. So we actually provide a solution to this. So I don't want in any way, shape or form want to drop anybody in the muck and say, look, you can sort of get on and do this. We've refined our program, the Winning Thinking program. There are 2 case studies on the website, which I encourage you to have a look at under the WTEQ on the winningthinking.uk to work through. So if anybody's on this call like to experience this and actually experience the challenge, have a look at those 2 case studies. They're not intended to catch you out, but I almost guarantee you that even the best psychologists will actually miss the point. Because it's sort of psychology plus pragmatism that we seem to have developed, because we're certainly not reading from a textbook. And I think the other thing is also changing the dialogue. So actually changing the dialogue in businesses to actually what really matters to people, because a lot of business communication really isn't interesting to a lot of people. And it doesn't really fulfill them in the way that they need to preserve some of the things you were talking about, David, in terms of their well-being. Even specifically, the very first chapter of the Winning Thinking program is it all about David, Tom or Mike? And if that is the case, that isn't a great perspective to start, because it's about actually ourselves, and we must look after ourselves' well-being. So part of this as well that's odd is that it also frees up 70% of your time, because when you realign this and get this right, you then have a whole raft of time on your hands. Anyway, cutting to the chase, we've broken this down to 20 minutes per day. We kick this off on a call. So there's no excuses, frankly, for not having the time. Everybody's got 20 minutes. It costs 1,200 quid because, no pain, no gain. I think that's an appropriate amount of money to get people to think. And we will guide people through this, but it's very much action orientated. So 20 minutes per day, we expect people to take a different perspective, a different action, and from that learn. And we'll check in with people to go through some of this detail. So after the 12 days, and having spoken to their team members and had this different dialogue, their well-being will be a lot better. The businesses will be realigned, and they'll be somewhere near where they should be. So that's my steer, I guess, in a nutshell, which is our attempt to support organisations through this time. As I go back, my main concern is that people recognising the warning signs, the urgency in this, in other words, recognising the things that normalise inactivity, and lastly, what's preventing your teams from taking new actions, and ourselves. What's preventing ourselves from taking new actions. So that's basically what it highlights. So I think that's my contribution to this discussion. So I welcome any comments or thoughts, David or Mike, that you'd like to ask on that. Is there anything in my talk, David? Any thoughts, David, in terms of things you agree with, disagree with, or?
Yeah, apologies. I was just about to say, Richard's putting a question in now. If you go into more, there's chat, but Richard's just put a question in now.
Oh, yeah. So Richard's just asked, if you are putting your priorities in order, what order would that be? Good question, Richard. Who wants to answer? That's a difficult question. Who wants to answer that?
For me, it's the order is yourself.
Yeah.
The people that are going to aid you in your survival,
yeah.
Your family members, your business colleagues, and whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then whoever that comes after that.
Yeah. Okay.
My answer to that question would be, you've got to do a couple of things in parallel. And I'm not quite sure which is more important, but there is this issue of engaging with the team, what I would call the key people in the team. It's not necessarily just the management team, but engaging with the key people and initiating this process that David describes with them individually, but equally at that initial session, you need to be talking about the need for action and different action.
Yeah.
At the same time that you do this, though, you've got to quickly understand the cash position of this business that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you know, cash is the oxygen of a business, and you can't go too long without it.
So,
So those two things for me is quickly reach the people, let them understand that you are with them, you are for them, and you will guide them, but they need to be driving action.
100%. Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Richard. It's difficult. I think there's a legal aspect to this first and foremost. So Mike just mentioned cash. Cash is a very big legal issue. So the shortest period of time that anybody has traded to the detriment of creditors, having joined an organisation because of cash, is 10 days, right? So there's a very real risk of flouting the law, and most people don't understand that. So the importance of cash and the governance of a business cannot be overestimated. I think the second point is around two things. One is being aware of the issues, okay? So it's about becoming aware of the issues to fix. So that's my main concern, Richard. As you probably, we've discussed in the past, I think otherwise there's a distinct danger that if you kick off a strategy without actually becoming aware of the problem to fix, you're just going to proliferate more of the same. I think the other thing is it's very much about having a place for everything. So when I'm running these reviews, I'm always looking to develop accountability to make sure all the fingers don't come back, point at me all the time. Which, and I'm not one to duck accountability, but at the same time, it's vitally important that everybody's thinking about what they're doing. And I think the other thing is I really challenged my own communication to make sure that people feel loved, they feel supported, and they know that I'm not asking them to hang them out to dry. And it's a very fine dividing line between giving someone something difficult to do and it being a very exciting, engaging process. And largely that, David, comes down to, smiling, humor, I think, and just having an interest in other people. I think a lot of leaders can become overwhelmed. The flip side of that is a lot of leaders can become very overwhelmed with their own self-importance, and increasingly the antithesis is to become increasingly autocratic. And actually, I think the antidote to that is to put other people first. Otherwise, you're in severe difficulty from day one. And I'm talking about situations where I've stood up in board meetings with with 40 or 50 builders in a board meeting, packed in. I couldn't even sit down. They're all packed in a board meeting. I've had to speak to them to give them an update, and frankly, it wasn't news that they're expecting and all wanting to hear. And there's a good chance they could have attacked me. They could have got into all kinds of different modes. And actually, because I had an interest in them and that was reflected, they frankly would do anything to support what I was doing. And one of them actually said to me, and it really threw me. I said, at this talk, he said, I was really struck. He said, "At last," and I thought that sounds like the normal sort of sarcastic comment that somebody can say on the shop floor, which is I mean that in a sort of pragmatic perspective as opposed to a label. But actually, what he meant was, at last, somebody was actually looking at the issues, and I thought, wow, this bloke has worked for the business for 40 years, and actually is at last looking at the issues. And that really struck me. And I was really taken by that. And I'd only met the guy for 2 days. So I think it's all about relationship. It's all about relationship. You've got to have strong relationships. You've got to take action. Otherwise, there's no credibility in that relationship. You've got to be seen to be making people's lives better. If it's all about us, then you've lost. You will get shafted in a difficult situation. And, even on a practical perspective, if you take the Bible, it talks about love being the only indestructible emotion, and I've definitely witnessed that. And the ability to forgive and put other people first is absolutely critical. So it's not a nice to have. You might a lot of people disregard the Bible as a good leadership book, but actually I think it does come back to those sorts of basics. And I like to check my thinking from a number of different angles.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I don't know if you've noticed, but Martin has popped a question there.
Okay, cool.
And he's asking, in turnarounds you've done, what were one or two most straightforward and at the same time most impactful actions, and then he refers to it also as low-hanging fruit.
Okay. Do you want to answer that, Mike? And I'll go after you. It's always easy to go second. Have you noticed that? I always ask you to go first.
Yeah. Really, the most impactful has sometimes been to sack the MD, but that seems kind of intuitive. But when you've got a situation where you've got such corrosive leadership, and that it has completely destroyed relationships in key people in the business, there's nothing else you can do, so that can overnight change the atmosphere in a business.
Yeah.
And the other thing is probably the second most impactful thing, or I don't know whether it's second, but a second example is addressing people on the shop floor and telling them what's going on here, and what your ideas are for developing a plan and getting out of it.
Yeah.
And undertaking to once a month come along and tell them what's going on in very simple terms. And that unlocks energy like you cannot believe amongst a group of people. Now, that was a factory situation, but I ventured to suggest, mind you, I've seen this also in service business type applications as well. Talking to them in that way, and likewise speaking to people such as your suppliers and your customers.
Yeah.
Because you'll find everybody understands that, we can make mistakes and get into trouble. But if you go to them and say, I've just taken over this business, and it has these problems. They are fixable, but I can only fix them if I have the ability to work with you on a solution, whether they're a customer or a supplier.
Yeah. Very good, Mike. Yeah. I would add to that, Martin. Thanks for the question. I think I fired an MD on day one, and regardless of the consequences, because it was. And the reason why I fired an MD, it was actually in that construction business I mentioned, and we got that business in control within about a week. The reason why I fired him was because I asked him one question. I said, "Look, what are the challenges you've faced, and what have you done about it?" Okay, and he recalled the challenges he faced, and then I said, "Well," and then he said he hadn't done anything about it. I said, "Look, that was so dramatic that I fired him on the spot. There was big consequences of this as well. It was big risk to the business, but there was just no option." So I think you're absolutely right. And a lot of the behaviours, what was happening there was there was this huddle thing. There was this huddle thing. People were hunkering down at board level, and there was no control of the cash. The business was severely at risk. So there was no option apart from to make that decision. The other thing I think is that in terms of a quick hit, which I think is a quick hit, although it's full of flawed psychology, is put your pricing up, right? So when you identify your core business, you put your pricing. I put pricing up in a print business that typically runs on 10%. People say 10%. Print business run 10%, put up 67% because it wasn't a print business, and that then drove the profitability. Right, it meant all of a sudden you got some cash. And I think the third thing is what I mentioned before, is having a place for everything. So when things happen, you want to make sure the monkey's not on your shoulders, because the reason for that is that the whole thing just falls apart without you. And people in these situations will look for every reason to deny or not face the issue. And it's not abdication of responsibility. It's also providing people an opportunity, and very motivating, just like you were, Mike, to provide a unique opportunity in these awful situations to actually do a great job. And I've actually had people in these situations, when you get this right, say to me, despite the fact they were being fired and they're on some sort of redundancy program, that was their best experience of their life. So, and I think organisations can only really offer what they can offer. There's not some sort of utopia. I think the utopia only comes into it when, you get the sort of leftist types involved in organisations. But if you're really clear with people about what the organisation can offer and give people great opportunities to develop and support them through it, I think, and find a place for everything and develop their accountability. And I've promoted people 3 or 4 times in 1 month partly because I had to and I could see the opportunity. But there was a really big return. I promoted my PA to run a factory of 400 people, just like that. And they were the last possible. I knew she got the balls to do it. I mean, so these things are all possible. And it's about, it comes back to, in fact, what John Webster challenged me on prior to this call was, will you, can you, and dare you, right? Those are the three challenges I think that leaders face. And they've got you. This is a time not for sycophantic leadership. It's actually a time for clarity. It's a time for realism. It's a time for opportunity. It's a time for open communication, and frankly, just being bloody straightforward with people about what you can offer, how long you offer it for, and give them a great opportunity. And just make them feel loved as well. I mean, and I don't mean that in a soft way, because actually letting go of responsibility is the most difficult that you can do as a leader. So, there you are, Martin. That's my.
I'd just like to add as well, I've worked with many people and obviously many organisations, and it's kind of tapping onto what Mike said really, but leadership, absolutely. But what people want is a feeling of valued, trust, autonomy, that they have self-worth and self-esteem. Most people want to be at work. Most people want to get involved in the turnaround, whatever it may well be, and want to be there and valued. And if leadership are having trouble with that, which they often can do, then, as you say, whatever needs to be happening, whether it's firing MDs or whatever, or just talking to them and getting them to understand exactly what the issues are so that they can move forward from it. But that's what I find. The staff need to be feeling valued. And it's certainly impactful, Martin, but not always straightforward.
Yeah. I think there's another really simple thing you can do as well, which is use people's names, right? Acknowledge people for who they are, which is actually very difficult for the boss because you have to learn a lot of people's names, but it makes a big difference just to acknowledge them. You talked about people being themselves, David, but if you don't know someone's name, it makes it a bit difficult to acknowledge them. I sort of tend to, every time I walk past someone, I just tend to acknowledge them and nod if I don't know their names, or if I don't know their names, say, like, sorry, I don't know your name, but at least I bloody well try to understand what their names are. I think that's so important to understand, to acknowledge an individual for who they are as a starting point. And it's very easy to be too busy when you're turning a business around to walk past people and not give them the time of day. And that's a sort of freebie, which can make a massive difference, I think.
Very true. Very true. Yeah.
Any other questions, guys? Anything, Martin, John, or Richard, or anybody else on the call? Anybody else like to ask any more questions? Okay, so that's all good. So, Mike, do you want to just sort of, we've covered quite a lot of ground. I'm not trying to, put you on the spot. In fact, I am. But you've got broad shoulders, my friend. I know you well. Would you just like to sort of pull out the salient points and, what are we encouraging people to do here? Because this is not a chat show, right? This is not some theory. I've just listened to a business school talk just now. This is not theory. This is about what are people going to do now? What are we encouraging people to do now? In fact, David, you might want to just chip in, as well, if there's anything else that might hit the weight off Mike's shoulders to support him. So we're not dropping him in the shit. So what would you say, Mike? What's your summary?
Thank you, Tom. I think it was very good that we started with David, because it's very easy when you walk into a business which is under massive pressure and all kinds of people are screaming and shouting, to overlook the fact that a business is an organism. It's a group of people. It's a very important element of our society, and we have to start at the individual level. And David's exposition of the nature of human beings, the commonalities and the uniqueness, and then his final 6 points I thought were very good, very, very good. Keeping active, actively seeking positive thinking and interaction with people, looking at your diet, meditating, whether it's on the Bible or whatever you use as a catalyst for that process, and also to remember who you are and what your beliefs are. Terribly important in a leadership situation to understand yourself as much as anybody else, because often we don't.
Yeah.
And then moving on to Tom. Tom highlighted these pressured situations, these distressed situations, as requiring urgent action on a number of fronts, and therefore it is actually quite difficult to prioritize. The fact that the government cash could provide some headroom for companies, but that if that headroom is not used to devise a plan, to test your plan, and to actually start taking action, but not just any old action, new action that is executed from within the company, not necessarily the leadership group. And so you need to create this new environment where people learn experientially, take risks, make decisions, look at the outcome, and through that build their own confidence.
Yeah.
Tom stressed this need for understanding what your core business was, and likewise in understanding that, to understand where all your generalizations and mantras were, to interrogate your plan and to interrogate whether that plan is really addressing the underlying challenges of your business, the real underlying challenges.
Yeah.
He spoke about this issue of assumptions and having to test your assumptions in this process. Avoid the quick fix, and they were always there. You know, Tom mentioned stuff like asset-based financing. I have fallen into that trap myself, and live to regret it.
Yeah.
Because as Tom says, you know, when things go against you with those type of financing situations, there is a multiplier in the downward spiral.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah, 100%.
So it's terribly important amongst leadership. Tom points out this issue of humility and valuing your people and bringing your people on, and thinking differently, I think, is finally what you did. And then, you know, I love that John Webster's summary there: will you, can you, dare you? And I can really hear a South African voice there when I listen to those words, because that is, in fact, the critical challenge for leadership in South Africa, not just government leadership, but across society. Will you, can you, dare you?
Yeah.
Very, very important. But I really enjoyed that. Thank you, gentlemen.
Exceptionally good. No, exceptionally good summary. Thanks for that. And I think it's a fairly accurate representation of Webster as well. Although he's not South African, he's gone a bit native, I think, since he's been over there. But anyway, John's got a good sense of humour.
The area it gets you down there, Tom.
Anything else, David, to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I would just remind everybody that there's a famous saying from one of my mentors: change is simple, it's just not necessarily an easy thing to do. Change is very, very easy. We all know how to do it. If we want to lose a little bit of weight, we just eat a little bit less and exercise more, is generally what the most population needs to do, but we don't do it. There's an obesity problem in the world. And you know, not taking away from you, Martin, what's the low-hanging fruit? Where can we get quick wins? You know, we all want them, and absolutely. But recognizing that the simple but not always easy to put in a process, that thoughts will create your feelings, feelings will create your actions, and actions will produce results.
Yeah.
You cannot ignore what you're thinking. And just to remind people, what does that mean? What are you thinking about? Are you thinking of positivity? Are you thinking about what frustrations you have? Are you thinking about what issues you have? Because that will create feelings of what we talked about before, feeling low, frustrated, angry. In other words, no serotonin, so no production. I'm just going to stay in, who cares, nobody loves me, Teddy's out the pram type kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Or positive belief, serotonin producing. It is the wonder drug that we all have. I mean, we've been producing it for about 1.5 million years, so we're kind of good at it now in this form and before. And remember, it's not just about yourself. So how can you influence positively the thoughts of the people that you're working with in the business that you're in, or that you're helping to change, to turn around, to make the differences that you want to do?
Yeah.
Take it from that point, and then you will always get the results that you want.
Yeah.
And again, as was mentioned, you know, you don't have to stay there forever. You don't need to sit and discuss for weeks on end, because action needs to happen. But the importance of that positivity is absolutely everything.
100%. Yeah. I think I'd add, I mentioned something occurred to me when you were saying that, was I mentioned earlier about the increase in alcohol consumption after March the 21st, right? It's a good example, like asset-based lending, of fudging an issue, not addressing an issue, and actually moving into an increased state of denial, which actually is quite disturbing, actually, if that's the response. I mean, I think we've all been, various times in our lives, found alcohol is a good escape tool. But I think it's a great example of a completely flawed action that actually can make things a whole lot worse. But oddly enough, it creates serotonin. Oddly enough, tech purchasing, which again has been found out, is triggering dopamine, triggering serotonin. People are stopping investing in tech businesses, which I think is good. But I'm concerned that people do take the right action. I'm also concerned about not wasting people's time and money and actually getting straight to this. So I wouldn't be on this call unless I had a bloody solution to this. And the Winning Thinking Program is a way to get straight to the relationship and all of these things we're sodding while talking about, because what worries me is that people are acutely unaware of this, okay? And people on this call will sort of say, oh, that's interesting, Tom. Nice, take some tidbits away from that. No, cherry pick. This is not a cherry picking list. It's not a cherry picking call. I'm really concerned that people are unaware of this stuff. They'll respond in a way that's convenient and easy. And as John said, will you, can you, dare you? And the answer is not to drink more alcohol. Trust me on that. It's not a proven technique. It's not even a short-term solution. I'm speaking from experience. I'm really, really keen that we do address the issues. I think it's also a journey. So I think the Winning Thinking Program, in 12 days, we can break the back of this, but as well as providing technical support. There's turnaround, it's got some unique legal risks. You can go to prison for paying the wrong people. As I said before, you can get locked up for trading to the detriment of creditors in 10 days. That's the shortest time that anybody has got locked up, not to mention the fact you're going to trash everybody's livelihood in the process if you don't take advantage of this time. So I'm acutely conscious of preserving cash, which creates time, and also using time wisely. So I have no other suggestion apart from to do the Winning Thinking Program. If anybody else has got any better ideas, bloody well tell me, and I'll bite myself. So that's my encouragement. And if anybody wants to raise that or drop any emails afterwards, please do. I don't intend, as I say, to share this video because that's just too lazy. Yeah, people who have sat through this call, as far as I'm concerned, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for your questions. But I think it shows a level of commitment. Cheers. Bye.